She was gone. That's the first thing my son said to me. No hello. No congratulations. No dad, meet your granddaughter. Just those 3 words, flat cold final. She was gone. If you're watching this video, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you are listening from. Because I need to know how far this story travels, and how far the truth about what happened to my granddaughter is finally reached. My name is Jack Thompson, and this is the beginning of the revenge I never asked for, but life forced into my hands. I was standing in the hallway of the Hyatt Regency in downtown Chicago when the call came in. I remember the exact sound the phone made, a tiny chirp drowned out by the hum of people heading to their conference rooms. I'd just finished rehearsing the closing keynote for a real estate symposium. I was tired, hungry, and thinking about grabbing coffee before the afternoon session. Then the phone rang again. Ethan. My boy. The kid who used to run barefoot across the frozen lake behind our old house and swear he wasn't cold. The kid I taught to drive stick. The kid who once cried when his goldfish died. Dad. He said, out of breath, she's here. The baby. Your granddaughter. I felt something in my chest crack open. I was 50 years old, but in that moment, I felt 25 again, strong, alive, hungry to hold that little life in my arms. Is Marissa okay? I asked. Everything good? Yeah, he said. Yeah, just get here. Dad. You should come. I closed the laptop in front of me, handed my badge to a staffer without a word, and walked straight out of the Hyatt into the late March Chicago wind. My cab ride to O'Hare was a blur, lights, horns, the smell of snow coming in off the lake. I booked the first flight to Minneapolis and tried to quiet the surge of nerves and excitement running through me. A granddaughter. I'd missed my chance to see Ethan grow up the way I'd wanted after his mother died. I'd worked too much, stayed away too much, tried to handle grief like a man who didn't know better. But this baby, this little girl, felt like a second chance I didn't deserve. But damn it, I was ready to fight for. I landed, grabbed a rental SUV, and drove straight to Ethan's house in Edina. I'd seen pictures of it. Marissa's parents bought it for them after the wedding. Big, white, colonial, perfect lawn, the kind of place that makes your chest tighten, with either pride or insecurity depending on the day. It was nearly dusk when I pulled into their driveway. I had a tiny pink blanket in my bag, a stuffed fawn I'd picked up at the airport, and more joy than any one man should be allowed to carry. I didn't even knock. I rang the bell once and the door opened. Ethan stood there. But something was wrong. His eyes didn't light up. His shoulders didn't lift. He didn't smile or laugh or say, Dad, come meet her. He looked like a man bracing for a car crash. Where is she? I asked, stepping inside. The house was too quiet. No crying. No bottles on the counter. No blanket draped over the couch. No baby furniture. Nothing. Dad. Ethan rubbed his face, then stepped back. We need to talk. Marissa appeared from the hallway. Designer sweater, diamond earrings, hair perfect. Not a trace of a woman who'd given birth 3 days earlier. She looked at me like I was a complication, a problem, a storm cloud rolling into her immaculate world. Where's the baby? I repeated. Ethan swallowed hard. We placed her, he said softly. For adoption. For a moment, I couldn't understand the words. They came in clear, but refused to arrange themselves into anything that made sense. You did what? My voice cracked. Marissa crossed her arms. Jack, please don't make this dramatic. It was the responsible choice. I stared at her. Responsible? You gave away your daughter. Our daughter was born deaf, she said. Severe bilateral hearing loss. It's limiting. Limiting. That word hit me like a tire iron. She's not damaged, I said. My voice shook But not from sadness, from rage. She's a baby. She needs you. She needs family. That's why we chose a family better suited for her needs, she said calmly, as if she were explaining a canceled dinner reservation. There's therapy involved, Ethan added weakly. Specialists. Time. My in-laws, I mean. Marissa's parents said Marissa shot him a look, sharp enough to cut glass. I stared at my son. Is this really what you want? He looked at the hardwood floor. It's done, Dad. I felt something rupture inside me. Tell me the agency name, I said quietly. I'll adopt her myself. Marissa stepped forward. It was a closed adoption, legally sealed. You don't have standing. And even if you tried, our lawyer has already made sure I didn't hear the rest. I felt the house closing in on me. The baby blanket slipped from my fingers. My throat locked. My breath went shallow. I stared at my son, my own flesh and blood, and saw a stranger. A deaf child isn't a burden, I said. A deaf child is a child. My grandchild. Marissa's face hardened. Well, she's not anymore. I walked out. I don't remember crossing the yard. I don't remember opening the SUV door. I only remember driving through falling snow until the world blurred into white streaks and headlights. I ended up at a motel off I-90, one of those places with buzzing neon signs and thin curtains that don't block anything. I checked in, dropped onto the bed fully dressed, and sat there staring at the wall until the silence felt like it was chewing through my bones. Somewhere out there, my granddaughter was alive. Alive, and unwanted by the two people who should have fought hardest for her. I pressed my hands to my face and felt something break clean, decisive, permanent. At 50 years old, I understood one truth with absolute clarity. I would not let that child disappear. Not into silence, not into the dark, not while I was still breathing. Tomorrow I would start looking for her, and I would not stop. Not for anyone, not for anything. The next morning, I walked into the office of Reynolds and Blake, the law firm Marissa's family used for everything from real estate deals to trust funds to whatever quiet problems wealthy people needed, cleaned up without leaving a footprint. I hadn't slept. I hadn't eaten. But I had purpose, and that was enough. The receptionist looked up as I stepped inside, still wearing yesterday's wrinkled clothes, eyes red from a night that had no end. Can I help you, sir? I need to see Attorney Blake, I said. Right now. Her smile tightened. Do you have an appointment? No, I said. And trust me, you don't want me to sit out here long enough to need one. Something in my voice must have convinced her. 10 minutes later, I was led into a glass-walled conference room overlooking downtown Minneapolis. Snow drifted past the windows in slow spirals. Then the door opened, and Michael Blake walked in. Silver hair, $2,000 suit, a man who smelled like polished confidence. Jack, he said, shaking my hand with too much warmth to be sincere. I heard you were in town. Congratulations on the new granddaughter. It was the first swing, and I felt it land. You know why I'm here, I said. He sat down, folded his hands. I assume you've spoken with Ethan and Marissa. They told me just enough to make me sick, I said. Now I want the rest. The agency name, where she is, how to get her back. His eyebrows lifted like he was disappointed in me. Jack, you know I can't disclose that. She's my granddaughter. And under Minnesota law, he said gently, grandparents have no automatic standing in adoption or custody proceedings. All decisions were made by the legal parents, Ethan and Marissa, and they followed procedure. Procedure. I leaned forward. You call giving up a deaf newborn because she wasn't perfect procedure. He didn't flinch. That told me everything I needed to know about the kind of men Marissa's family surrounded themselves with. Look, Blake said, it's a closed adoption. Permanently sealed. The files are confidential. Even if you sued, even if you won, which you won't, the agency is protected. There is no path to identifying the adoptive family. That's bullshit. It's the law. No, I said softly. It's your influence, your connections, your signature, your fingerprints. His smile vanished. Jack, I'm advising you as a friend. Don't pursue this. Let the child move on. Let Ethan and Marissa move on. Don't disrupt what's already done. I stood up. You can tell Marissa's family this. I'm not backing down. I'm not disappearing. And if you think I'm afraid of money, or lawyers or reputation, then you don't know a damn thing about me. The mask slipped for a fraction of a second, just a flicker of annoyance or maybe fear. Then he smoothed his tie and said, Jack, don't make this harder than it needs to be. I walked out. I didn't slam the door, didn't yell, didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing a man unravel. But inside me, something was sharpening. I hired Dan Kessler, a former Minneapolis PD detective with a reputation for being relentless. The kind of man who didn't mind bending rules when the moral compass pointed true. I met him at a diner off Highway 62, the kind of place where old men drink coffee at 3 p.m. and nobody asks questions. Dan listened to my story with narrowed eyes. A newborn, he asked. Closed adoption, and the in-laws are the ones pulling strings. Yes. He nodded, scratched something into a notebook. I'll dig. Might take a few weeks. I handed him an envelope with $5,000 in it. Don't let them scare you. He shook his head. I don't scare easy. That was the last time I believed him. 2 weeks passed, then 3, then 5. His calls went from steady updates to excuses to silence. I started calling him twice a day, then 3 times. Nothing. Finally, I drove to his office, a small brick building near Bloomington. His name was still on the door, but inside, empty. Desk cleared. Files gone. Key on the counter. A single note sat taped to the window. Case closed. No longer available. I stood there holding that scrap of paper, feeling the temperature in my veins drop. He didn't run. He wasn't scared. He was bought. Bought by people who didn't want a deaf child discovered. Bought by people who didn't want the shame of a flawed baby staining their perfect lineage. Bought by people who believed their version of family was worth more than mine. I walked back to the car in the cold, sat behind the wheel, and didn't start the engine. I wasn't just up against Ethan and Marissa. I wasn't even just up against their parents. I was up against a machine wealth lawyer's influence, reputation pressure, intimidation. They wanted my granddaughter erased, scrubbed out, forgotten, gone. I ended up back in that motel. Room 205. Same buzzing light, same thin blankets. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. All my life, I'd handled things with force, work harder, dig deeper, push through it. But this wasn't a problem I could punch. This wasn't a door I could kick down. I needed another way. Something slower, something patient, something permanent. About an hour past midnight, I pulled my laptop into my lap and typed American Sign Language classes near me. A list popped up. Community colleges, deaf advocacy centers, church groups, even YouTube videos. All of them felt like threads I could pull. I didn't know where my granddaughter was. Didn't know who had her. Didn't know if she was safe. Didn't know if she was being loved. But I knew this stars, one day, somehow, somewhere I would find her. And when I did, I wanted the first thing she saw from me to be words in her language. The most important words of my life. I never stopped looking for you. I closed the laptop, made a list, planned my next weeks, and finally lay back staring at the ceiling. I wasn't giving up. No matter how big their machine was, no matter how deep the legal pit went, no matter what it cost me. The powerful had made one mistake. They thought a man over 50 would get tired, would back down, would accept defeat. But they'd forgotten something. Men my age don't scare easy. We've already survived too much. And this time I wasn't fighting for myself. I was fighting for her. I didn't plan on moving back to Minnesota. I thought Chicago would be my last city. Good job, good condo, predictable winters. But grief has a way of prying you loose from the life you thought you'd built. One morning, 2 weeks after that night in the motel, I woke up, looked out at the gray sky and knew I couldn't stay there. I packed everything I owned into the back of a rented U-Haul and drove north mile after mile until the Minneapolis skyline rose like a familiar bruise on the horizon. I found a small rental house in Bloomington, single-story old hardwood floors, a little backyard with a crooked maple tree, and decided it would be home at least until I figured out how to breathe again. I emailed my boss listlessly from my phone. I need time off. Family emergency. Indefinite. He called twice. I didn't answer. Some things don't need explanation. That first night in the new house, I sat cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by cardboard boxes, and watched the shadows move across the wall. Then I pulled a worn notebook from my duffel bag and wrote 2 words across the first page: find her. Below it, I began to list steps. Real steps, not emotional ones. 1. Learn ASL. 2. Map adoption routes. 3. Visit agencies. 4. Track paperwork inconsistencies. 5. Follow any lead, no matter how small. By the time I capped my pen, the page was full. I felt steadier. I signed up for an ASL course at a community college 10 minutes from my rental house. Tuesday and Thursday evenings. Beginner Level 1. The class brochure had a smiling group of people on the cover, hands raised mid-sign. I remember thinking, that'll be me someday. Then I laughed out loud because hope felt ridiculous, but I clung to it anyway. The classroom smelled like dry erase markers and old carpet. The first night, 12 of us sat in a semicircle, while the instructor walked in, tall white beard, denim shirt, buttoned all the way up. He moved with calm authority. He raised his hands. My name is Howard. He signed, slow, deliberate. Then the interpreter spoke aloud. This is Professor Howard. He's been teaching ASL for 40 years. Everyone nodded politely. I nodded like a drowning man spotting land. The first thing I learned was the alphabet. Or rather, I tried to learn it. My hands didn't cooperate. The letter F looked like I was checking the wind direction. H came out like a broken pair of scissors. R made my fingers cramp so hard I wanted to swear. At one point, I mixed up S and A 3 times in a row, and the college-aged kid next to me chuckled under his breath. I didn't get angry. Not at him. Not even at myself. I just kept trying. Old men know something younger folks don't. Persistence beats talent. Every time. After class, while people filed out, Howard came up to me. He placed a hand on my shoulder, not hard but enough to anchor me. He pointed to my notebook, where I'd scribbled awkward drawings of the alphabet signs. Then he signed slowly, "You work hard. Come early next class." I help. I swallowed a wave of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Gratitude, heavy and sharp. "Thank you," I said quietly. He nodded once, as if the conversation were settled. Every night after class, I came home and went straight to the spare bedroom. I'd turned it into a war room, a place for pin-string-taped printouts, timelines. The walls slowly filled with names of adoption agencies, social workers, hospitals, counties, and nonprofit organizations across the Midwest. Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, Illinois, the Dakotas. I stuck red pins where infants were placed, blue pins where records were sealed, yellow pins where I was met with polite stonewalling that made my teeth ache. It wasn't a search. It was a siege. I worked until after midnight. Most nights, I'd fall asleep with my fingers sore, from signing drills my neck stiff, from staring at maps. Sometimes I'd wake to find myself gripping a pen in my hand like a weapon. Every time frustration crept in, I reminded myself, if a little girl was out there, my blood, my granddaughter, she deserved a grandfather who didn't quit. One Thursday evening after class, Howard signed for me to stay behind. He gestured for me to follow him to a row of desks in the back corner. He pointed at my hands, then at his, then began demonstrating the alphabet again, slowly this time. He corrected every mistake with a gentle tap. He made me repeat signs until my knuckles ached. When class ended and the room emptied, he signed, "Why do you want to learn so fast?" I hesitated. For a moment, I considered lying, saying it was for work or a friend. Something simple. But something about Howard, the patience, the steadiness, made honesty feel like the only choice. I signed back, slowly stumbling through the shapes. My granddaughter is deaf. I lost her. I am trying to find her. His face softened in a way I hadn't seen before. He tapped his chest twice, an ASL sign, meaning I understand. Then he signed, "You keep coming. I teach you everything." I nodded, throat tight. Sometimes the world hands you the right person at the exact moment you need them. Howard became that person for me. It was late November when I got the first whisper of hope. I'd been calling every hospital within 200 miles, pretending to update family medical history. Most calls ended with a flat, "Sorry, sir, we can't disclose that." But one night, around 8:30 p.m., a woman picked up at a rural clinic in southern Minnesota. Her voice sounded tired, like she'd worked a double shift. I gave her my usual line, "I'm just looking to confirm some hearing test documentation for a newborn girl born on March 14th. There was a long pause, long enough for my stomach to drop. Finally, she said quietly, "Sir, I'm not supposed to say anything." Another pause. But that file, it wasn't handled normally. My pulse kicked up. "What do you mean?" "I mean," her voice dropped. "It was moved. Twice, physically moved. Then sealed. And the person who authorized it, let's just say they don't usually handle medical records." "Who?" I whispered. She hesitated again, then exhaled, defeated. I shouldn't talk. But someone didn't want that file seen. Someone with money. Influence. My heart hammered. "Do you know where it went?" "No," she said. "But sir, whatever happened with that child, it wasn't standard procedure." Before I could ask more, she hung up. I sat there in the dark, phone still pressed to my ear, feeling the air change around me. This wasn't just carelessness. This wasn't just cold parenting. This was a cover-up. Someone had tampered with the records. Someone had erased the trail. Someone wanted that little girl to vanish from the world. But they'd made one mistake. They left a crack. One whisper. One nurse. One hint that not everything had gone according to plan. And I've learned something in my 60 years. You give a man like me a crack, I'll tear the whole damn wall down. I used to believe that if you knocked long enough, any door would eventually open. Turns out, some doors aren't made of wood. They're made of money, connections, fear. And every one of those doors slammed in my face. That winter, I drove through half the Midwest with a thermos of gas station coffee and a glove box full of rejection letters. Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, North Dakota, every adoption agency that handled newborn placements in the last decade had a version of the same line. "We're sorry, sir, but this is a closed file adoption. We cannot provide or confirm any information." Some said it politely. Some said it like they wanted to call security. One receptionist actually slid the blinds shut while I was mid-sentence. Everywhere I went, I felt the same cold script, tightening around me, like invisible hands pushing me out the door. It didn't take long to notice a pattern. Whenever I mentioned the approximate birth date or the hospital, the tone changed tiny shifts, like someone flipping a switch in front of them. A stiffening of shoulders, a glance toward the back office, a quiet, nervous swallow. Someone had gotten to them. Someone had warned them. By the fifth agency, I knew who. I called the first PI I'd hired, Brett Caldwell. He'd seemed eager in the beginning, wide-shouldered ex-police, sharp eyes. For months, he'd sent updates. Then nothing. I dialed his number again. It rang twice before he answered, voice low and strained. Jack, don't call me anymore. What happened to the information I paid you for? A long silence. Then he whispered, I can't talk about it. I pressed harder. Did someone threaten you? I could almost hear him looking over his shoulder. They said if I keep digging, they'll sue me for defamation. Said they'd drag me through court for years. I got a family, Jack. I can't. You're talking about Marissa's parents, aren't you? I said. He exhaled shakily. That was answer enough. They have a legal team that eats people like me for breakfast, he muttered. Just let it go. There's no trail left to follow. Then he hung up. I sat there in my car, gripping the steering wheel until my hand ached. A man like Brett doesn't scare easily. But power, real established generational power, can make anyone fold. My granddaughter wasn't just abandoned. She'd been erased. The only place I found any sense of belonging during those months was the Deaf Community Center in Minneapolis. Thursday night conversation groups. I was the oldest beginner in every room, but no one made me feel foolish. As my ASL improved, I started catching pieces of conversations. Jokes, complaints, stories about kids or partners. A whole world that didn't need sound to feel full. Howard, ever patient, corrected my grammar with the flick of a finger. At times it felt like learning to breathe differently, slow, intentional, expressive. There is something humbling about being 60 and struggling to articulate even simple things. But that humbling cracked something open in me. And people noticed. One night, a young social worker named Clara approached me after a group session. She was maybe late 20s, glasses slipping down her nose, hair in a messy bun. She'd watched me practice fingerspelling earlier, with all the intensity of someone trying to decode a foreign alphabet. She tapped my shoulder gently and signed, "You're signing. Better." "Thank you." I signed back, awkward but proud. She smiled politely. Then her expression shifted, more serious. She signed, "You look searching." "Long time." I hesitated, then nodded. She kept her hands moving, slow and careful. "Baby adoption." My breath caught. "Yes," I signed. "My granddaughter." Her face fell with a kind of soft ache. "I'm sorry." Then she looked around the room as if checking who might be watching. That was the moment I realized she knew something. When everyone else had gone home, Clara approached me again. This time she didn't sign. She spoke softly, almost to herself. "I work with children in the foster and adoption system," she said. "I've seen things." Her eyes flicked toward the door like a frightened deer. "Clara," I whispered. "Please, if you know anything I don't know," she said quickly. "I don't." But her hands trembled, and a person who knows nothing doesn't shake like that. "What happened to my granddaughter?" I asked. Her voice cracked. "Jack, I can't lose my job. I can't risk it. There are families, powerful families, who know how to make trouble disappear. Like Marissa's." I pressed. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. I felt the frustration claw up my spine. So many locked doors, so many people too scared to even speak. Then, just as she turned to leave, she paused. Her eyes softened. She signed one word. One symbol, really. A location sign. A city. Columbus. Then another childcare facility. And then she made a small motion, two fingers tapping her shoulder. A sign I didn't recognize. Ask for that, she whispered. It's not information, just a code. Someone will understand. Before I could thank her, she walked away, head down, steps quick, as if she were escaping the very conversation she'd just created. But I stood frozen, heart pounding. Columbus, Ohio. A place I hadn't mapped yet. A pin I hadn't even considered. For the first time in a long while, the air felt different. Like the world had shifted 1 inch in my favor. That night, I went home and stood in front of my wall map. The Midwest stretched in front of me like a battlefield. Red pins, blue pins, yellow pins. Years of frustration. Years of dead ends. And now, for the first time, I reached for a green pin. I pressed it into Columbus, Ohio. A new color. A new direction. A breath of possibility after miles of silence. I stepped back, stared at the green pin glinting under the bedroom lamp, and felt something spark inside me. Hope. Raw, painful, electric hope. Maybe, just maybe, the trail wasn't dead after all. Columbus, Ohio, didn't look like a place where secrets lived. Just flat highways, chain restaurants, quiet neighborhoods, and people walking dogs in the cold. But I'd learned something over the years. It's never the dark alleys that hide truth. It's the clean offices, the smiling staff, the paperwork stamped confidential. The child care facility Clara had pointed me toward sat behind a row of bare maple trees. The building was brick, small, forgettable, exactly the kind of place that could swallow a life without anyone noticing. Inside, everything smelled like disinfectant and crayons. A receptionist in her 20s smiled at me. "Can I help you?" I repeated the coded sign Clara had taught me. 2 fingers, tapping the shoulder, then sweeping outward. Her smile collapsed. She stared at me, throat bobbing, and whispered, "Please wait here." Which meant, this means something. She disappeared down a hallway. A moment later, an older woman emerged, gray hair, soft jawline, sweater, with little embroidered birds. She looked like the kind of person who'd offer you soup when you didn't know you needed it. "Mr. Carter?" she asked quietly. "Yes. My name is Helen. I used to run this facility. I'm retired now, but they call me in sometimes when—" She hesitated. "When someone uses that sign." She led me to an unused office, closed the blinds, locked the door. My heart pounded like it knew what was coming. Helen sat down slowly, as if lowering herself into memory. "I shouldn't be doing this," she whispered. "But I'm too old to be scared anymore." She reached into an old file box in the corner and pulled out a folder so thin it looked almost empty. The label read, "Unplaced, transferred from Minnesota through 2014, do not release." Even seeing the state name made my breath catch. "Why was it sealed?" I asked. Helen sighed. "Because the family who initiated the surrender had influence. When people with money want a child hidden, the system bends." She looked up at me. "I assume that's why you're here." I nodded. She opened the folder. Inside was a single sheet of medical information, a few behavioral notes, and a photograph of a girl. 8 years old, dark hair, thin shoulders, eyes too old for her age, sitting alone on a playground bench. Her name, at least the one she'd been given, was written at the top. Lila. My hands trembled before I even see the rest. "She stopped talking when she was small," Helen said softly. "We think she learned early that no one would listen." I swallowed hard. "She lived here for almost a year," Helen continued. "Then the state transferred her to Pennsylvania, a long-term care center there. Hardly any family inquiries. No adoption applications." I stared at the photo, my chest tightening until I felt like I was breathing through a straw. Then I saw it. On her left shoulder, just visible beneath the collar of her shirt, a small birthmark. shaped like a drop of paint running downward. The same mark my son had. The same mark my father had. The same mark I had kissed on my granddaughter's newborn skin, at least in the future I'd imagined. My knees almost gave out. Helen reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. "She's alive," she whispered, "and she's waiting for someone who actually wants her." I closed the folder and held it to my chest like it was oxygen. Then I drove. I don't remember most of the miles, only the sound of the tires on asphalt, the hum of the heater, the ache at the back of my throat. Minnesota, Wisconsin, Ohio, Pennsylvania. Hours blurred into one long stretch of desperation and hope. Every time my eyes got blurry, I'd pull over, breathe against the steering wheel, then force myself back on the road. I'd waited almost a decade for even a scrap of direction. Now I had a face, a name, a mark, and I wasn't losing her again. By the time I reached Pennsylvania, the sky had turned the color of wet cement. I found the center an older building with faded murals on the exterior. Kids' laughter drifted faintly from the backyard, mixed with the cold wind. My hands shook as I signed in at the front desk. A staff member escorted me through double doors down a hallway, decorated with construction paper snowflakes, and finally into a small courtyard. "She's out here," the woman said. "She likes the bench near the fence." I turned the corner, and there she was. Lila sat curled up on a wooden bench, coat zipped up to her chin, hair pulled into a ponytail that was already falling apart. Kids played tag behind her, but she remained still, like someone who'd taught herself not to take up space. My breath caught so hard it hurt. She looked up at me when she sensed movement, quick glance, then away again. She didn't want to be noticed. Children who've been passed over learned that early. I approached slowly, heart pounding against my ribs. I sat down at the far end of the bench, leaving plenty of space. I didn't speak, just waited. After a moment, she looked at me again, tentative, cautious. I lifted my hands. "My name, Jack." Her eyes widened. Shock first, then recognition, not of me, but of the language. She signed back slowly, stiffly, as if frightened of getting it wrong. "Lila." The world stopped. I swallowed hard and nodded. For a long, fragile moment, we just looked at each other. Her eyes flickered to my hands, then back to my face. Then as she reached to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, her coat collar shifted. And there it was. Left shoulder, soft skin. A small, perfect birthmark shaped like a falling drop. My vision blurred. My throat closed. Every mile, every sleepless night, every slammed door, it all led here. To this child. To this moment. I managed to sign one more thing, even though my fingers shook. "Look, for you." Long time. Her lips parted. Not a sound came out, but her eyes, God, her eyes lit up. A raw spark. The first sign of hope I'd seen on that face. Then slowly, cautiously, as if afraid the world might take it back, she leaned the slightest inch closer. And I knew, with a certainty I've never felt before. This was my granddaughter. This was the child they tried to erase. And now I had found her. I didn't have the luxury of hesitation. The moment I left the Pennsylvania Center, I drove straight to a clinic 2 towns over and paid for an independent DNA kit, the kind that could be expedited with a rush fee and a signature. I arranged a quiet appointment with the staff at Lila's facility for the sample. Everything was lining up. But the world has a way of testing you right when your hands are still shaking from hope. 2 days later, my phone rang, and the nightmare walked right back into my life. "Jack," the woman said. "It's Attorney Blake. We need to talk." For a second, I thought the call had come from underground, cold, dead, suffocating. I took it anyway. "What do you want?" There was no softiness in her tone. "We've been informed that you attempted unauthorized genetic testing on a minor, currently in state custody." My pulse spiked. Lila belongs with me. You have no legal standing, she snapped. And until you stop interfering in matters outside your jurisdiction, my clients, Mr. and Mrs. Morrison, will pursue court action. Marissa's family. They knew. They knew I'd found her. And now they were coming to erase her again. This time I didn't hang up. I let the silence grow heavy. Then I said, let them try. The next morning I arrived at the Franklin County Courthouse for what was supposed to be a simple petition to approve DNA testing. Instead, I walked into a small war. Marissa's parents arrived in a polished black SUV, dressed like they were attending a fundraiser instead of a hearing about the child they'd thrown away. Their attorney, a man with gelled hair and a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my first car, approached me with a smirk. This hearing will be short, he said. You have no grounds, no rights, no claim. I leaned closer. I have something you don't. And what's that truth? He actually laughed. Right there I made a decision. I walked outside, pulled out my phone, and made a call. Howard, I said when he answered. I need help. 2 days later, the courthouse steps were covered with people. Not lawyers, not wealthy families, not political donors. Deaf adults. Parents of deaf children. Advocates, teachers, students, interpreters. Howard stood at the front, signing with deliberate force. A child was thrown away for being deaf. We will not let that happen again. Local reporters showed up. Cameras, microphones. Stories ran on the evening news. More people gathered the next day. Marissa's family tried to hide inside their SUV, but it didn't matter. The narrative had shifted. I wasn't the father interfering with an adoption. I was the grandfather searching for a discarded child, a child marginalized for her deafness, for her perceived imperfection. Public pressure grew so loud that the judge could feel it vibrating in his own chambers. By the time our next hearing arrived, the courtroom was full. Judge Ellison was a man who preferred hallways with no windows. Everything about him was gray hair suit tone, but he couldn't ignore the crowd outside or the reporters in the hallway. He cleared his throat. Mr. Carter, you are requesting permission for a DNA test on a minor, currently in state care. Yes, I said. He turned to the Morrison attorney. And you oppose this because... The man stood. Your Honor, this is a closed adoption case. The biological parents released all rights. This man has no legal standing. Moreover, a test could destabilize the child's placement. She's not placed, I interrupted. She never was. He shot me a glare. Regardless, I stepped forward. Your Honor, this child has lived in institutional care for 8 years. She has a birthmark identical to my son's. She knows ASL, but hasn't had a consistent adult in her life. She deserves to know who she is. The courtroom went silent. The judge shifted in his chair. Then he exhaled. With the public attention on this case, he said slowly, I believe transparency is necessary. Marissa's lawyer stiffened. I am approving the DNA test, Judge Ellison declared, effective immediately. I closed my eyes. A door had finally opened. It took 6 days. 6 days of pacing my rental house. 6 days of replaying the look in Lila's eyes when she first signed her name for me. And then the envelope arrived by certified mail. I didn't open it at the table. Didn't sit down. Didn't breathe. I tore it open while still kneeling on the doormat. 99.8% probability of a biological relationship. I dropped the paper. My hands were shaking so hard they nearly tore the page. I had found her. After every dead end, every slammed door, every mile of road, I had found her. And then the phone rang. It was Ethan. Not Marissa. Not her parents. My son. Dad, he said, voice trembling. I heard the test came in. My jaw clenched. And now you care. I didn't know, he stammered. They told me my in-laws told me the baby wouldn't be placed, that she'd get care. Stop, I said. You had a choice. You made it. Lila paid for it. He went silent. Then came the part I wasn't expecting. Dad, he whispered, I want to see her. No, I said immediately. You don't get to decide that. Not anymore. Behind him, I heard voices, Marissa shouting, her mother screaming something about family image, and he's ruining us. A full collapse unraveling in real time. I closed my eyes. Ethan, I said quietly, you didn't lose your daughter yesterday. You lost her the day you walked away. And I hung up. The adoption court moved fast. Faster than I'd expected. The media coverage made sure of that. Lila was assigned a guardian ad litem, a sharp-eyed woman named Deborah, who interviewed me with a depth that made me sweat. But when she saw the timeline of my search, the maps, the classes, the notes, the way Lila reacted when I visited her again, her tone softened. She trusts you, Deborah said. She doesn't trust easily. I know, I replied. I won't break that. The hearing lasted 3 hours. Marissa's parents argued it was too disruptive. Their attorney argued I was emotionally unstable. Someone even tried to claim Lila would thrive better in a structured environment. Structured. As if a childhood spent in institutions was a gift. My lawyer, an older woman named Vicky who'd fought for children longer than I'd been alive, stood up for me, like she'd been waiting her whole life for this case. She ended her argument with one line. Your Honor, this child has been waiting 8 years for someone to show up and refuse to leave. Mr. Carter is the only person in her life who has done that. Silence swept across the courtroom. The judge cleared his throat, shuffled his papers, looked at me. Mr. Carter. A long pause. You are granted full permission to adopt Lila. My chest cracked open. I didn't cry. I didn't make a sound. I just lowered my head and let the weight of 8 years exhale through me. Then I signed the papers with hands that were finally steady. Lila was coming home. Not someday. Not eventually. Now. The day I brought Lila home, Minnesota felt different. Quieter. Softer. Like the whole state was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen to the two of us. An old man and a little girl trying to learn how to be family. The drive from Pennsylvania had taken 14 hours. She sat in the back seat the whole time, backpack clutched to her chest like a shield. Every time I checked on her through the rearview mirror, she wasn't looking out the window like most kids would. She was watching me, studying me, as if trying to determine whether I was another adult who would eventually disappear. When we finally reached the little rental house in Bloomington, she stepped out of the car, slowly, eyes scanning the yard, the front porch, the windows, like she was mapping every exit. I opened the door and signed, "This is home." She didn't react. She just slipped inside quietly, shoes still on, backpack tight against her body. 8 years of institutional living teaches a child to move like a ghost. No sound. No expectation, no presence. I didn't want a ghost. I wanted my granddaughter. I'd spent days preparing her room, soft quilt, tiny desk, string lights, a shelf of children's books into both English and ASL illustrations. But when I guided her to the doorway, she froze. She didn't step in, just stared at it. Her hands sized, signed slowly. Too big. 8 years of dorm-style beds and shared spaces will do that. I nodded. Then I signed, "We make small." Together. She looked at me unsure. Then she set her backpack on the floor and chose a spot right next to the bed closest to the door, as if she might need to leave fast. That night, she didn't sleep in the bed. She curled up on top of it, fully dressed, shoes still on, like she wasn't convinced she could stay long enough to get comfortable. I stayed awake in the living room, just listening. Every time the floor creaked, she startled. Every time I moved, she stiffened. It wasn't her fault. It was history. You can't unteach fear in a night. The next morning, I made pancakes. The smell filled the house. When I called her to the table with a soft sign, 2 fingers tapping my wrist, she came immediately. Too immediately. Children in institutions learn to obey fast or risk losing meals. She sat at the table, hands in her lap, eyes down. When I set the plate in front of her, she didn't eat. She waited, watching me, studying my face like she needed permission that I didn't know how to give yet. So I signed eat, safe. She picked up the fork and ate like she expected me to take the food away. Fast, silent, no breaths in between. It broke something in me I didn't know was still intact. Over the next days, I learned as much about her as she learned about me. Lila didn't like closed doors, didn't like raised voices, even laughter made her flinch. She didn't know how to play, didn't know how to choose a snack, didn't know she could say no. But she was curious, quick, smart in ways most people never see. Every afternoon we practiced ASL full immersion. No talking, no half-formed gestures, pure seeing. I'd sit across from her on the couch, our knees almost touching, and we'd practice eye contact. That was the hardest part for her. Looking someone in the eyes meant trusting they would still be there tomorrow. But she tried. And every day, she managed 1 second longer than the day before. I brought her to the Deaf Community Center on her 2nd week home. She didn't cling to me. She went stiff like someone preparing for impact. The moment we stepped inside, conversations died. People turned, watched her. It wasn't judgment. It was recognition. Kids like her don't often find their way into safe spaces early. A little girl named Jenna approached first, tiny red-haired hands moving fast and bubbly. She signed high and want to draw. Leela stared at her, like the question wasn't real. I signed gently, say yes if you want. She hesitated, then she nodded. She followed Jenna to a table covered in crayons and paper. 10 minutes later, they were sitting shoulder to shoulder drawing messy houses with crooked chimneys. Howard appeared behind me, arms folded. Good, he signed. She will bloom. I swallowed. Couldn't speak even if I wanted to. It happened one night, 3 weeks after she came home. I was sitting on the living room floor sorting paperwork. Lila sat on the couch, legs crossed, coloring. The house was warm and quiet, a soft lamp glowing beside her. Then I heard it. A tiny noise, barely audible. I looked up. Her coloring pencil had dropped. Her shoulders were shaking almost imperceptibly. I moved slowly, sitting on the floor in front of her. She wouldn't look at me. Tears rolled down her cheeks silently, the way children cry when they've been taught that sound equals trouble. I lifted my hands. What hurt? She stared at her lap. Her fingers trembled, then formed the signs with halting, broken movement. You, not, leave. My heart caved in on itself. I shook my head hard. I reached out, not fast, not sudden, and gently took her small hands in mine. Then I signed with every ounce of steadiness I could gather. I stay. I don't leave. Never. Her breath hitched a tiny cracking sound. Then she threw herself forward, arms around my neck, face buried in my shoulder. She shook with the force of it. 8 years of fear. 8 years of being unwanted. 8 years of waiting for anyone to stay. I held her, carefully, like she was something muttrid. Because she is. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were wet, but clear. She signed one last thing, hesitant and small, promise. I nodded. Then slowly, deliberately, I signed promise. That night, she slept in her bed. No shoes, no backpack, no fear big enough to keep her on the edge. And I slept on the couch outside her door, just in case she woke up afraid. We were learning each other. Two souls who'd been bruised by life in different ways. But for the first time, we weren't learning alone. Time has a strange way of folding in on itself. One moment I was a man in my 50s, pounding on locked doors begging the universe not to let a child slip through the cracks. The next moment, I was 68, sitting at the kitchen table of the same Bloomington house, older, slower hair, mostly white, watching Lila, now almost 16, sign her way through a heated conversation with her best friend over video chat. She was confident now, sharp, expressive, her hands moving like sunlight. No trace of the scared small girl who once slept with her shoes on. I'd spent years learning how to be a father again, this time with patience I didn't have in my 20s, and hope I didn't believe I deserved in my 40s. And she'd grown into someone I admired more than anyone I'd ever met. Then an email arrived, the kind that stops your breath halfway through your chest. It came at 6:42 a.m. Subject line, Dad. From Ethan Carter, my son. A son I hadn't spoken to in 13 years. I stared at the screen so long the sun rose and turned the window gold. Part of me didn't want to open it. Part of me wanted to throw the laptop across the room. But age has a way of sanding down anger until all that's left is a tired ache. So I clicked. His message was short. Too short for the years between us. Dad, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from. I've made mistakes, terrible ones, and I can't fix what I broke. You were right. Everything you warned me about. It's happening. Marissa's parents have been indicted for securities fraud. Hundreds of millions. Everything we thought we had gone. They are facing federal charges. We're bankrupt. I know none of this is your problem. But Dad, I need to tell you something. Marissa and I adopted a boy 14 years ago. His name is Logan. He's 17 now. He's a good kid. Better than we deserve. And he's been asking about you. Do I have a grandfather? I told him the truth, that I don't deserve a second chance. But maybe he does. If you're willing, he wants to meet you. Ethan. My hands trembled when I reached the last line. A grandson. 17. Old enough to have opinions. Old enough to decide who he wanted to call family. The irony wasn't lost on me. Ethan had thrown away his daughter and kept a son who wasn't biologically his. I sat there stunned. Then I realized someone was standing behind me. Lila had seen my shoulders stiffen. She tapped softly on the counter to get my attention, a habit she'd kept since she was little. What's wrong? She sighed. I turned the laptop toward her. She read the email slowly, her jaw tightening. She signed nothing at first. Her hands stayed still on her lap, fingers curled. Then finally, he has a son. He kept him. Her face was calm, but her eyes were storming. And I didn't blame her. Not for a second. She signed again, more sharply now. He can raise a boy, but not me. I reached for her hands. She didn't pull away. You are not replaceable. I signed, but his choices do not define you. She shook her head. Why does he want you now? Fair question. I let out a breath. Because he's drowning, I signed. People reach for the ones they hurt when their life collapses. I paused. But Logan, he didn't choose any of this. Her expression softened just a little. Then she signed the part I knew was coming. Do you want to meet him? I didn't answer right away. Because the truth was complicated. I owed Ethan nothing. But Logan, he was 17. The age when you question everything you've been taught. When you start searching for who you really are. Maybe I signed, but only if you come with me. She looked surprised. Then she nodded once firmly. Before I agreed to anything, I needed to know who this boy was. So I spent the next week calling every number I could find, talking to anyone who'd pick up. I spoke to a former teacher of his, a neighbor, a part-time coach from a rec center, Every one of them said the same thing: Logan's a good kid. Quiet but kind. Smart. Wants to be a counselor someday. Never causes trouble. Then I found something unexpected. A report from his old school in Denver. He'd lived there a few years when Ethan and Marissa were still living high off the Morrison wealth. He had taken 3 years of ASL classes. That stopped me cold. I contacted his old ASL teacher, a woman named Maria. She called me back in less than an hour. When I introduced myself as Jack Carter, she went silent. Then she whispered, "Logan? He dated a deaf girl. A sweet kid named Hannah." They were inseparable. My chest tightened. "What happened?" Her voice dropped. "His parents found out. They made him break up with her." A pause. It devastated him. He stopped signing after that. I leaned back in my chair, pulse ticking. Ethan and Marissa had controlled him too, manipulated him, policed who he could love just like they had tried to do with their own daughter. But Logan hadn't turned cold like them. He'd learned ASL. For a girl. For connection. For understanding. That alone told me more about his heart than any DNA test ever could. I knew what I had to do. We arranged the meeting in Denver, where Logan now lived in a small apartment, with Ethan now jobless, stripped of everything, reduced in ways money had never prepared him for. But I wasn't going there for Ethan. I was going for the boy who had asked if he had a grandfather. The flight was quiet. Lila leaned into the window, watching the clouds with that expression she gets only when she's thinking about too much at once. When we landed, my heart thudded like it was trying to get free. We met at a modest coffee shop near the foothills. Logan was already outside, tall shoulders, hunched backpack slung too low, hands stuffed in his pockets. He looked up when he saw us. His eyes, warm brown, cautious, hopeful, landed first on Lila, then on me. He took a step forward. "Hi," he said softly. Then he hesitated and lifted his hands. "Grandpa." Not perfectly signed, but clear. Intentional. Meaningful. Lila's breath caught. She froze. Then Logan turned to her with a gentleness that surprised me. "Hi," he signed. "I'm Logan." Her walls didn't fall, but they cracked. She signed back, stiff, but polite, "Lila." And when he smiled, shy, kind, a little nervous, I felt something shift in the air. A connection forming between two kids who had both lived under the shadow of the same broken people. Logan wasn't like Ethan. He wasn't like Marissa. He wasn't part of that machine. He was his own person. And for the first time since I'd opened Ethan's email, I felt something unexpected. Hope. For him. For Lilaze. For us. A family, strange, complicated, imperfect, was beginning to take shape. Right there on a Denver sidewalk. I had barely taken 2 sips of my coffee when Logan's hands started trembling. Not from fear. From the weight of something he'd been holding in too long. We sat in that small Denver cafe, mountains in the distance, sunlight on the floor, air too thin for how heavy the moment felt. Lila stayed close to me, back straight, eyes sharp. Logan kept shifting in his chair like he was trying to outrun his own thoughts. Finally, he said, "I need to tell you why my dad really reached out." His voice cracked on dad. I didn't move. I didn't try to comfort him. I just looked at him the way I would look at any scared 17-year-old who needed someone to stay still long enough to hear him. He swallowed hard. "Ethan and Marissa. They didn't want me to meet you because I'm curious. They wanted me to meet you because they're drowning. They thought that if I could get close to you, you'd," he grimaced, "help pay their debt." Lila's fists clenched under the table. I stayed silent, jaw tight, heart dead calm. I'd expected something like this. Rich families don't reach out unless their world is collapsing. Still hurt like hell hearing it said out loud. "They told me to make you feel guilty," he continued, eyes burning. Told me to call you Grandpa and act like I cared so you'd feel responsible. His hands shook harder. I didn't want to. I told them it was wrong. I told them. His voice broke. I told them I didn't want to trick you. Lila was watching him with that unreadable expression she gets when her emotions are too big for her hands to manage. Finally, she signed softly, "Thank you." Logan blinked fast. For what? For not lying, she signed. Then slowly, painfully, she turned to face him fully. Her chin lifted the way she did when she was about to do something brave that scared her. She signed, "I am the baby they threw away." Logan froze. He didn't look confused. He didn't look shocked. He looked devastated. Like someone had thrown a brick at the glass house he'd built to survive his own family. "Oh my God," he whispered. He looked at Lila again, eyes searching her face. They really?" She nodded once. He sat back like he'd been punched. "I knew they were cruel. I knew they controlled everything. But this abandoning a baby, He shook his head hard. "I don't understand how two people can live with that." He turned toward me, voice breaking. "I'm done with them. I'm done pretending they're good people who made a mistake. I'm done covering for them. I'm done playing their games." Something inside me, something old and tiered, finally exhaled. Because for the first time in my life, I saw a piece of Ethan I'd always hoped existed, living inside a boy who wasn't his, by blood, but by heart. I organized a meeting the following week. Not in a cafe, not in a courthouse, not in anyone's home. I booked a conference room at a legal mediation center, neutral ground, glass walls, long table, quiet hallways. And I invited everyone. Ethan, Marissa, their bankruptcy-appointed legal supervisor, 2 federal investigators tied to the Morrison fraud case, and of course Logan and Lila, who insisted on coming. When Marissa walked in, she looked gaunt, angry, and expensive in a way that no longer worked. Ethan looked older than me, hair thinning, face hollowed by guilt, or fear, or both. Logan sat between me and Lila, protective, determined. The legal supervisor cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter requested this meeting to discuss matters relevant to the ongoing investigation." I held up a hand. "No, we're not doing speeches." I stood, looked Ethan dead in the eye. "You wanted the truth. Here it is, all of it." I turned to Lila. She lifted her hands slowly. And she told him. Everything. The orphanages, the silence, the fear, the hunger, the nights sleeping in shoes, the years believing she wasn't worth keeping. Her signs were sharp, precise, beautiful. An interpreter voiced the words, but Ethan didn't need them. He watched her hands like they were knives cutting through the last layer of denial he'd been hiding behind. Then she pulled her shirt slightly off her shoulder, exposing the birthmark. Small, curved, identical to his. Ethan collapsed into the chair, hand over his mouth, a sound escaping him that I'd never heard, not as a child, not as a man, not as a father. A father seeing the child he abandoned, alive, real, right in front of him. He whispered, "Lila, But Marissa leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, and scoffed. This is ridiculous, dramatic. She wasn't healthy. She was defective. We did her a favor." Logan slammed his hands on the table so hard every agent in the room flinched. "Stop." His voice shook the air. "You don't get to call her that. You don't get to call anyone that. You ruined her life. You ruined mine. You controlled everything. You dictated who I could date, who I could love, because of your fear of imperfection." He pointed at Lila. "She's more of a person than you or Dad ever were." Marissa's face twisted. "Logan, sit down." "No." There was steel in his voice. "I'm leaving that family. I'm done. I'm living with Jack and Lila." They're my family now. One of the agents leaned forward. Mrs. Morrison, while we're on the subject, there are additional allegations we need to discuss. Marissa stiffened. The agent opened a folder. Tampering with adoption records, obstruction of custody ICSS, destruction of sealed documents, all tied to the case involving this child. Marissa's face went white. She turned her fury on Ethan. This is your fault. If you had kept him away from that old man. And that's when I stepped in. Enough. She froze. I walked forward, slowly, leaning on years of exhaustion and something deeper clarity. You destroyed a child's life. You tried to destroy a second one. And now the world is finally watching. Marissa was shaking, eyes darting between the agents. Ethan stared at her like he'd never seen her before. Logan squeezed Lila's hand. For the first time in years, she didn't flinch. By the end of that meeting, Marissa was officially placed under investigation for record tampering. Ethan broke down, agreeing to cooperate with authorities. Logan signed temporary guardianship forms to live with me until he turned 18. And before we left, Lila stepped forward. She signed 3 words to Ethan: slow, steady, honest, I forgive you. Ethan burst into tears. Do you mean it? He whispered. She answered with a quiet shake of her head, then signed, I'm learning. It was more mercy than he deserved, but that's who she is, who she's beside, who she chose to be despite him. And as we walked out together, me, Lila, and Logan, the late afternoon sun hit us like a blessing. A strange, imperfect family, built not from blood, but from truth, and survival, and choice. The morning after Denver, I woke up feeling older than 70, not because of age, but because of the weight I'd finally put down. For 13 years I had carried grief like a second spine. For 13 years Lila had carried abandonment like a shadow. For 17 years Logan had carried guilt that didn't belong to him. And for the first time, all 3 of us walked out of that mediation center lighter, not healed, not perfect, but unburdened. We stayed in Colorado longer than planned. It wasn't my idea. Logan asked if he could show us the places that made him who he was. The rec center where he learned ASL. The park where he used to sit alone after Ethan yelled at him for dating a deaf girl. The view from Lookout Mountain, where he'd go when he felt small and wanted to feel big again. Lila watched him with that steady curiosity of hers, the kind she used to survive 12 years of silence. And Logan looked at her the way someone looks at a story they've been waiting to understand. Somewhere between the city and the mountains, we became a family. Not by blood, not by obligation, by choice. We rented a small place outside of Golden, a 2-bedroom with warped hardwood floors and a kitchen too small for 3 people who kept bumping into each other every time we cooked breakfast. But it was ours. I filed the guardianship papers. Logan signed them. Lila decorated her room with photos from her school back in Minnesota. Logan hung a cheap poster of the Rockies above his bed. I bought a kitchen table from a thrift store, scuffed uneven legs, 3 mismatched chairs. Perfect. You're really okay with this? Logan asked one night as we ate frozen lasagna like it was a feast. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't, I said. Lila nodded, signing with her fork still in hand. We are a team now. Logan smiled. Yeah, we are. He didn't stop smiling the rest of the night. When fall came around, Logan applied to Metro State in Denver's social work program. The admissions officer asked him why. He didn't hesitate. Because there are kids like my sister out there. Kids who think they're broken because someone told them they were. I want to be the kind of person who tells them they're not. I looked at him across the table, chest tight. He said my sister like, it had always been true. Lila didn't react outwardly, but the corner of her mouth lifted in the tiniest smile, the kind she only gives when something reaches her heart before her head has time to deny it. He got accepted. Logan cried. Lila hugged him so fast and hard, he nearly dropped the acceptance packet. I sat down in the nearest chair and thanked whatever God listens to old men. Lila, meanwhile, had been shadowing instructors at the Colorado School for the Deaf and the Blind. The first day she walked into that building, I swear every piece of doubt she'd ever carried dissolved. She came home signing faster than I'd ever seen excited, breathless hands, flying like hummingbirds. "I want to teach," she signed. "I want to teach kids like me. Kids like her. Kids who had been ignored. Kids who had been underestimated. Kids who had been told their sequence made them lace instead of whole." She joined an intermediate interpreter course. She volunteered for after-school programs. She tutored elementary kids who followed her around like she was some kind of superhero. Maybe she was. Maybe she always had been. I hit 70 that winter. Lila made a cake that collapsed in the middle. Logan burned the bacon. The smoke alarm went off twice. The frosting tasted like sadness and vanilla. It was the best birthday I'd had in decades. Because at 70, I finally learned something I wish I'd known at 30. Family isn't something you inherit. It's something you fight for. And sometimes something you rebuild from scratch. Even if people call you crazy. Even if it takes 12 years of searching. Even if it costs your youth, your pride, your peace. Because when you find the ones worth fighting for, you don't stop. One morning in early spring, I woke before sunrise. My bones ached. My back popped. My feet complained. Every part of me reminded me I wasn't young anymore. But the air smelled like coffee. And something else, something softer. Hope, maybe. I walked into the kitchen. Lila was sitting at the table, hair messy, wearing my old flannel shirt. She was signing her homework to herself, practicing classroom vocabulary. Logan was at the stove cooking eggs, real ones this time. Not frozen disasters, still wearing his hood up, like a teenager hiding from daylight. "Morning, Grandpa," he said. Lila looked up, smiling with her whole face. "Good morning." Sunlight spilled into the room, like it had been waiting for the three of us. Specifically, I stood there, just watching them. This boy, abandoned emotionally. This girl, abandoned physically, both meeting in a place built out of the ashes of what hurt them. A family born from pain, but also from grace. Logan set a plate in front of me. Lila pushed over a mug of coffee she'd brewed the way I liked it. Too strong, too bitter, too much. We ate in that tiny kitchen, shoulders bumping, laughter, mixing with the clatter of cheap forks, and I realized something I'd spent 12 years searching across states, knocking on doors, following trails that went nowhere, all for a child who'd been thrown away. I found her. But in the process I found someone else too. Logan, my grandson by heart, not blood. And myself, an older version who finally learned how to stay, how to forgive, how to build instead of mourn. When we finished breakfast, Lila signed something that made me swallow hard. "We are a real family now." Logan nodded. And I, an old man who once thought his story was ending, realized she was right. Family isn't something you're given. It's something you choose. Something you defend. Something you build with your own tired hands until it stands strong enough to shelter the people who need it most. We stood there, the three of us, in a kitchen, too small for such a big moment. A girl once abandoned, a boy once manipulated, and a man who refused to let either of them be forgotten. A real family, made not from blood, but from love, dignity, and the courage to begin again.